Do you ever wonder what's really going on in government, locally, in the state of Tennessee, and across the country? I'm Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson, and on Tennessee Today, we dive into the issues that shape our communities from local policy to national debates. Each episode, I break down key topics and issues, share my perspective from over 20 years in the Tennessee legislature, and talk with guests about the decisions that impact your daily life. I hope you enjoy these honest conversations and that they help you stay informed and engaged. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Tennessee Today wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Hey folks, this is Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson. I want to welcome you back to another episode of Tennessee Today. And today I've had this like a run of people that I really think a lot of, and today it's no exception. A couple of weeks ago I had Newt Gingrich on the podcast, and then I've had Marsha Blackburn on the podcast, and now I have Eric Wilson, who runs a podcast called Campaign Trends, which I am a regular listener of. Is on today, and I'm super excited to have a conversation about him. He's done so many things in the campaign world that I'm not really sure where I want to start, and so it will just be sort of a meandering path today. But Eric, welcome to Tennessee Today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm great to be with you, and congrats on the success of your podcast.
Well, I'm really enjoying doing it, mostly because I'm getting to talk to some really cool people like you. And for those folks who don't know, Eric, can you take a second and just tell us a little bit about Campaign Trends, what your mission is and the vision there, and how you run that podcast?
So I'm a political technologist helping Republicans break through on the cutting edge. I want to make sure that our side has the best tech, the best tools, the best research, so we can run effective campaigns. And so what Campaign Trend is a newsletter. We send out best practices every week. We have a podcast that comes out on a every other week basis, and then we break down all of the news from political, digital, technology, things like that. So we keep an eye on it. My background is in digital campaigning. I ran the digital team for Marco Rubio when he ran for president in 2016, worked on a number of campaigns, both here in the U.S. and internationally as well. So I really am passionate about making sure that our side uses the internet and digital technology as effectively as possible to win more elections.
Well, and that's kind of how I got I found you. Now, let's see, you used to have another name before you went to Campaign Trends. It was...
Yeah, we were the Business of Politics show.
That's right.
And that started off as sort of almost like a how I built this for political campaigns. And then we wanted to expand it and be able to have more conversations. So we still talk a lot about the business of politics, but we call it Campaign Trend.
Yeah. So on Tennessee Today, I try and stay relatively focused on state and local government. Occasionally we expand into the federal space. A month or so ago, I had our congressional member, Chuck Fleischman, on, and we talked about the difference between federal and state, and particularly around budgeting and how all that works. So I try to keep the conversation around the state and local affairs of Tennessee. Your most recent podcast really focused in on that. Your most recent podcast was about using technology at the local level, and you talked about how local candidates, particularly like city council, county commission, those kind of candidates, that 99% of the elected offices are in that space, but yet they have limited resources to use some of the technology that you talk about on your program. In doing that, what was your thought of how to reach those at the local level? How can what you're doing help them with their campaigns?
Yeah, well, I'm really passionate about the people who are willing to get their hands dirty, roll up their sleeves, and work hard. And you, as a state official, know just how much work goes into running for office and staying in office and representing your constituents. And so people like that need to do more with less. And that's where technology is by its definition, a tool to give you leverage to be able to do more with less. And I think more so at the local level than sometimes we see at the national level. We have people who want to do things rather than be things running for office. And so that's why I like to highlight tools and things that you can do, whether you're running for county commissioner, city council, or, state senate or something like that. And those tools really bring kind of the resources of a much larger campaign within reach. I think that's one of the areas that we're really focused on with some of the startups that we work with, because I've worked on big campaigns, and we have the budget and the resources and the donors to be able to do really exciting things, but that doesn't scale down to where most of the elections are happening and where most of the decisions are being made. And so I'm really focused on how do we get technology down the ballot, so we can run more effective campaigns. And the only way you can do that is with technology.
Yeah. So how would a practical application here for you? How would a local candidate running for county commission, or even someone running for a state house or a state senate candidate, how would they access some of these tools? How do they find out who these people are? How does that work?
Yeah. So we certainly try and highlight them in our newsletters, our podcasts, things like that, so people can learn about new technology. For example, we talk about relational organizing all the time, and best practices for doing that. That's using technology to get your supporters to text their friends rather than hearing from the campaign. Another way that we do that, we partner with the Leadership Institute to do training, other organizations with specific training. But one of the big things is I work directly with entrepreneurs, the startup founders in this political space who want to build tools for candidates. And the biggest challenge for us is matching candidates with the tools. And so coming on shows like this and getting the word out about all the tools that we have, startupcaucus.com is the website for that. We actively invest in campaign tech startups, and we do that because we want to make sure that they're legit. We don't want any Cambridge Analyticas or fly-by-night operations that people can't rely on.
So you have my communications team went to your campaign digital summit, or your digital campaign summit,
Right.
which I assume you bring all of they came back with just really glowing remarks about how surprised they were at the magnitude of that summit. Tell me a little bit about that summit and what its purpose is, and do you do it once a year or a couple of times a year? How often do you do your digital summit?
Yeah, so that's done in partnership with Campaigns and Elections magazine. They're or not a magazine anymore, I guess just a website. They're celebrating, I think, 45 years of being in the business. We are always eager to speak and help sponsor those events because it does bring people from across the country, across the world, to learn about what's new in digital campaigning, and how can we apply it. And it is bipartisan or nonpartisan, if you will. And so sometimes you hear things from Democrats, and sometimes you hear things from Republicans, and secrets slip out. But really the thing that we learn is that the grass is always greener on the other side. We're all fighting the same challenges, especially when it comes to sort of overcoming the stagnation that sets into campaigns. The old way of doing things it has a lot of inertia.
So we're in a sort of an off cycle. I know, like Virginia and some of the that have elections during this time of year, but most of us this has been an off cycle year. What kind of recommendations do you have for candidates, people who are running for re-election, or for people who are looking at perhaps running for election? What, from your experience and talking to all the different digital experts and your experience in campaigning, what should candidates be doing right now?
Yeah. Well, so I like to joke that in Virginia, where I live, Virginia's for lovers of elections because we have an election every year. It's a great place to be a political consultant, as you can imagine. And so it really is kind of a laboratory. But, for those of us who have even year elections, like Tennessee, this is a time for preparation. This is when you're getting ready for game day. The only thing that we can't get more of in campaigning is time. And so this is, we can call it downtime, but it really shouldn't be. This is when you are going to those local groups, those county groups, the foot soldiers for your campaign, the people who you're going to go asking for favors for. You don't want to turn up in October or September of the election year and they haven't seen your face in 2 years or 4 years, and have your hand out. And so this is really where you invest money and time in that relationship bank. The other thing that campaigns need to be doing is creating content, exactly like what you're doing. So you're building an audience, you're staying in touch with people, you're communicating with them, you're getting them to opt in for email lists and text messages. So when the time comes, when you need their attention and you need their help and their support, they know how to get in touch with you. You know how to get in touch with them. Another area, you mentioned it, is training and just building those skills. You've been at this for a while and you've had to learn new skills to keep up with the game. Doing a podcast interview is very different than going on your local TV news or talking to the Chattanooga Times Free Press. Did I get that right?
You did. Good for you. And folks, to my listeners, you can tell that he attended the University of the South at Swanee because he knows about the Chattanooga Times News Free Press. So good for you, Eric.
Yeah, still a loyal reader of the Swanee Mountain Messenger.
There you go. Yay, Swanee's right.
That's right. So, learning new skills, like how do you host a podcast? How do you're being a host is going to prepare you for going on hopefully other podcasts in Tennessee to be able to have those conversations. So it is the off season. I guess, I'm originally from Texas, so I think we're starting to get into two-a-days before school gets back with football. So that's what time it is with these off-year elections.
Yeah. So in one of your earlier podcasts, you used a term that I was unfamiliar with. Maybe I should have been, but I was unfamiliar with it. And you used it several times in this conversation, and that is relational campaigning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, relational organizing.
So help my listeners understand what that means and how you do that, because I immediately got that. I heard that podcast and I immediately sent it to my communications folks and said, y'all need to listen to this, because I think, one of the really cool things I like about your podcast is you talk a lot about technology and you talk about digital tools and all that kind of stuff. But you inevitably go back to some of the fundamentals of blocking and tackling in the political world, which is, you still gotta go out and meet people. That digital does not replace the other things that are in the campaign world. And this whole idea of the relational organization, what does that mean, and how does a candidate even go about begin doing that?
Yeah, well, your listeners already know what relational organizing is, even if they don't know the term. And it's just friends talking to friends about politics. And consistently, we've done this for ages. I was looking at something where Cicero's brother was his campaign manager when he ran for Senate back in ancient Roman times. And he wrote him a letter saying, you've got to go into the marketplace and make friends with everyone and get to know them. Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, they all talked about the importance of relationships and personal connection. Well, what has changed is we now have some technology and data that can make this a little bit more effective. And so the idea is that a campaign gets one of these apps, asks its volunteers to download the app, and the volunteers text the friends that they know already and say, hey, I'm supporting Bo Watson for state Senate. He's a great guy. Will you make sure that you have a plan to go out and vote for him on Tuesday or early voting, whatever the message may be? And as much as your voters like you, Senator, the message coming from the friend is going to get more attention and it's going to be more highly regarded than if it were coming from a campaign, from an anonymous phone number. And so relational organizing has really been kind of this big development that we've seen over the last 10 years, came out of the left, and our side is catching up on it. And we did a field test through the Center for Campaign Innovation in Florida last year and found that voters who received a text message from someone that they personally knew were 8.6 points more likely to go out and vote than people who just got a random text message.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the endorsement from a friend means more than an endorsement from a campaign or a candidate for that matter. So that is so true, and we kind of know that intuitively. But obviously, the data proves that that's still true. I was fascinated with that particular podcast that you did because of course, now I'm trying to figure out how do I make sure that I'm doing that, because I think there's this new shiny object mentality, and to some degree, and we'll talk about this in just a second, but technology, digital, and now AI have become the new shiny object, and everybody wants to gravitate towards the new shiny object and invest a lot of money in digital, where you have to. It's not an either or; it's an and. You got to be in the traditional blocking and tackling of normal campaigning or traditional campaigning, but you also have to have an online presence. You have to have various technologies where you're trying to reach people of different groups, which brings me to my sort of next question. I've talked about a little bit on some of your podcasts, and that is, how do you break through all the noise, right? Like, there's if you look at podcasts or you look at other types of digital medium, there's so many out there. How does a candidate break through all of that? Is it repetition? Is it, some candidates use crazy antics? In your experience, is it just luck? Is there any special sauce there, or is it just keep grinding away?
Yeah, I don't think there's any shortcut. It is you got to keep grinding away. I've got 2 small children at home, and anyone who's a parent knows that you have to repeat yourself a lot. And eventually the message gets through, I'm told. I haven't seen that yet, but that's one of the reasons.
Well, I have an adult son, and I can tell you that the message never really penetrates. You just they give you lip service, but keep at it.
Yeah. And so that's why you see TV ads over and over again, whether that's for politics or Coca-Cola. They're going to be repeated because that repetition is how we as humans retain and acquire new information. So that's just hardwired in our brain. The challenge, as you point out, is that our media and our attention is now so much more fragmented than ever before. So, in my career, you could take your campaign and go get on all 3 local news networks, talk to the local paper, and get on talk radio in the morning, and you reach most voters. That just isn't the world that we live in today. And so you've got to go on podcasts, you've got to go on local news, but you've got to go talk to the person who has the blog, and you've got to figure out how you get on, the Daily Wire and talk to the people who don't pay attention to politics but still vote. And so that's a real challenge. And I think I try and give people this image of a sandwich of what we're trying to do is, come in from below. That's the relational organizing. So use the trusted messengers within our own personal networks to reach voters and break through, but also from top down, which is the influencers, the content creators, the people who are really disrupting media today, and being able to reach those voters from, and I'll give another technical term here, parasocial relationships, right? So you've had the misfortune of having to listen to my voice for several hours on my podcast. We have never met until today, but we have a relationship. And so that is just as important in some ways as those friend-to-friend contacts. So we have to cut through. And I think a big takeaway that I'm starting to see is that it really just comes down to more. So you look at the 2024 election, one of the big takeaways was Donald Trump went on more podcasts than Kamala Harris. We ran the numbers, and it's about 70,000 podcast appearances or mention for President Trump compared to just 12,000 for Kamala Harris. And so certainly not all those podcasts said good things about him, but more really made the difference. And so that just means that it's important for candidates and parties to have very clear, broadly appealing messages that they can repeat over and over and over again, and eventually they'll cut through.
Yeah, that's still, again, that's traditional campaigning. I mean,
basics.
it's,
Yep.
instead of, direct mail, we still do direct mail, particularly those of us at the local level and state level, we still use a lot of direct mail. I know even people at the national level still
It's
use
still
direct mail.
very effective.
But yet you got to factor in the digital side, which is, what we're learning to do. Now, in your experience, how much do you think I'll call them traditional platforms of things like Facebook. I know in one of your podcasts you talked about that YouTube and Facebook were the kind of the leaders of the social network platforms. How critical do you think it is for candidates now to have a presence on those kinds of platforms? Do you think it's as important now as yard signs and as important now as door-to-door knocking?
Yeah, so we poll after every election where voters get their news and information from, and we find that more voters log into Facebook every single day than watch their local TV news. Now, Senator, if the local TV station called you up and said, "Hey, would you like to be on the show tonight?" you would probably end the podcast and head on over there. We've got to make sure that candidates are doing the same thing and devoting the same time and resources to reaching out to voters via Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and these platforms. It's important that we reach voters where they are. So just down the road from us on I-95 here is Hanover, Virginia. They're famous for their tomatoes. I've worked with candidates who don't like tomatoes, but you better believe that they show up at the Hanover Tomato Festival where 30,000 people gather every year. And so we've got to do the same thing with social media. One of the challenges, though, is with the proliferation of platforms like Facebook, Instagram, True Social, TikTok, YouTube Shorts. I mean, we can go on and name them all. It's impossible for a campaign to be able to have presence on all of those platforms. So we really have to pick and prioritize the ones where we reach the most voters at one time.
Yeah. And I think here in Tennessee, that's probably Facebook, although I think YouTube has become very, very popular as well.
YouTube is a little tricky, though. So a lot of people watch it on their big screen at home. And so I have colleagues who say, "Oh, no, don't call that social media. It's TV." And then I have, you look at it on your phone or on your computer and there's likes, there's comments, there are all those social features. And so it's a little bit of both, kind of defies definition, but important because people are spending a lot of time there.
Yeah, it is a bit of a hybrid. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right, it is. And of course, President Trump, he really invested in the different streaming services, right? I mean, he kind of has his things with traditional media, but he really got into the streaming services. And again, that's another spot that I don't think so much at the state and local level you're going to see candidates moving as much into, but certainly at the federal level where they have the financial resources to do some of those things. I think my campaign will play in that a little bit just to see what it's like or just to touch that base, but I would think that would be a little bit more difficult.
You have to with all that great internet there in Chattanooga. It's some of the fastest internet speeds in the country, right?
Yeah. Our EPB has a great product. Of course, we have a lot. Let me be political here, Eric. We have a lot of great providers in the state of Tennessee.
Okay.
A lot of All right. So the hot topic around the world, but particularly in the United States, is AI, artificial intelligence, and you've talked about that somewhat on your program. A couple of your episodes have talked with different people about incorporating artificial intelligence and the good and the bad, the safe and the dangerous. I'm actually on the AI Council here in the state of Tennessee. I passed legislation that created an AI Council for us to try and figure out from a government's perspective, how much should the government be involved or not be involved at the state level, and how much should the government utilize AI in our own operations? Are there things that we could use AI in to help people when they're applying for certain things or they're seeking certain types of information that the state can provide? How do you see AI in the next? I know in one of your episodes you talked about AI really wasn't as big a factor in this most recent election. How do you see that playing out over the next couple of years? Because, AI is just accelerating at a speed no one ever imagined.
Yeah. And I think it's really important, and why I emphasize some of the positive uses, because a lot of people, especially if they don't know anything about AI, maybe they've only seen the Terminator movies or 2001: A Space Odyssey, they have a grim picture of it, and they only think about all the bad things that could happen. And that's true to some extent, but we haven't really seen evidence of that. Thankfully, due to leadership by the platforms, and some initial regulations at the state level. Um, I like to point out some of the ways that it can help level the playing field for candidates. So, for example, we mentioned all the different platforms that you have to have content to be able to reach voters on. Well, AI tools make that possible. I have a 3-hour long training where I walk through people who are going to be candidates, on how do you turn a podcast like this or a long form video into a bunch of different social clips using AI. That's something that when I was working on the Marco Rubio for President campaign, we had 3 people working on that. And so now you have AI being able to do that in just a couple of minutes. And so lots of great tools to kind of speed things up and make your message more accessible and reachable to other voters. I think one of the really interesting aspects is translation. I work on campaigns all over the world, and there sometimes having to translate into different languages can be a challenge, and some people don't get that content. As President Trump has grown our party's coalition, we have a more diverse electorate, and we need to speak to more people. So AI can be really helpful in that regard. We're still trying to figure it out, but my message really to lawmakers is, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater right away and say, oh no, we can't let artificial intelligence come into politics. I think sometimes those state lawmakers want to have a monopoly on the artificial intelligence in politics.
Yeah. So in your role now you mentioned the Leadership Institute. What's your role at the Leadership Institute? What do you do there? Are you a
So I'm a faculty member. Yeah, I teach all of our digital training. All of our digital training is available online for free, thanks to our generous and reliable donors. So we have trainings there. I did one the other day about AI. We talk about email and fundraising. We talk about using social media. One of my favorites right now is podcasting, how to be both a guest and a host.
How am I doing? How am I doing?
You're doing great, Senator. You're booking great guests, and you're using the right platform. So so those are the kinds of trainings that we do, and try and make those accessible to folks who may have no background in campaigning at all, which is really the mission of the Leadership Institute.
Yeah, and I think y'all really do focus at kind of the grassroots level, right? I mean, really trying to motivate and get people engaged and involved, and I think that's really so critical. We often, again, on your most recent podcast, your guest pointed out that 99% of elected offices are at the local level, and that very, very thin slice of people at the federal level, and a little bit thicker, but still a pretty thin slice at the state level. But when you get into all these local races and local positions, that's where the bench is built for future leadership, correct?
That's right. I started out as a grassroots campaign guy, and those will always be my roots. But I always joke that the smaller the campaign, the smaller the election is, the nastier the politics get. Give me a presidential campaign any day over a
school board
local
race
neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps the most vicious of all. So, how did you get into this? How did you land on? First of all, what you do as a career, but secondly, how did you land on doing the whole digital thing?
Yeah, so out of Sewanee, I went to Washington, D.C. to work for a congressman from Texas, Michael Burgess. He just retired last year after 20 years in Congress. I volunteered on his first campaign, and we had this new thing called Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, and we were looking at, well, how do we get our message out as the minority? When most of the coverage is going to go to first female speaker of the House and things like that. And so no one else wanted this job. And so it was perfect for a young guy to learn how we could use technology and streaming and things like that, and eventually realized that probably the more innovative way to use that was going to be on the campaign side. And so that's whenever I left Capitol Hill, started working with candidates running for Congress on how to set up a website, how do you do social media, convincing politicians that they need to get on social media. So really early sales jobs there, and then worked really hard to raise a few $1,000s online and spend a few $1,000s on digital ads. Fast forward to 2015 and 2016 when I was leading the digital team for Senator Marco Rubio, learned a whole lot on that, and then kept going and doing some campaigns. And one of the things that really frustrated me is, win, lose, or draw on a campaign, it's over at the end of it. And so we would build these really great teams and these great operations, but they wouldn't persist. And so one of the things that I want to do is figure out, okay, how can we build something that sustains, and finding these startups, these tech startups that are servicing campaigns is one way to do that. And then in that process, realize that there needs to be an evangelization, if you will, of why we need to do things differently and try new things out. And so that's when I launched the Center for Campaign Innovation, and we have the podcast and all of these things, and really just trying to be a messenger for using technology more effectively. I like to tell candidates all the time, I have very few opinions about what you say. I have a lot of opinions about how you say it. And I want you to say it in the most effective ways using the latest technology. And so I've been very fortunate to have this become a career, and hopefully, get our side up to the cutting edge and stay there.
Yeah. Well, like I've said over and over again, I really enjoy the conversations that you have, and you're really skilled at it, and your guests are just been outstanding. But now that I know that you worked in Congress and you're on and you do digital, I do have a question, a somewhat perplexing question for me that I've been meaning to ask. I meant to ask my Congressman Fleischman about it, and that is, with all the technology available, why is it that these congressional people still use the placards to show something when they're out on the floor? They'll come up and they'll hold this thing up, and somebody will hold it, and then they'll take it down, and somebody put another one up. Is there actually a rule about that? Are they prohibited from using a digital image or something? I find it.
There is. The person you should have talked to about that was Newt Gingrich. He was the one who came up with the idea for televising those special order speeches. And there's large format printers that exist in the Capitol, and they would go out of business if they didn't have those posters to do. But yeah, I agree. I think Congress is a traditional institution. It's going to take a while. They have the capability with their voting boards, which you'd be familiar with from your own chamber. You can turn those into TV screens. They're LED, and so you could use a little bit more multimedia. I think you're starting to see some committees do that. Usually, the committees are the ones that lead the way on technology. But it's sort of like. If you've ever been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, you've got 15 different churches in charge of that one building, and they can't all agree on what to do. And
so they don't do anything. They don't do anything.
Exactly.
Well, I just think I kind of chuckle because, I watch them and they've got, I guess, maybe a role like you play, some poor soul that's got to sit there and listen through this whole thing. And then they keep changing out the placards on the tripod.
I tell you, one of the reasons I knew that I needed to get off Capitol Hill and work on campaigns where things would be a little bit more freeing is I got in trouble with the IT department at the Capitol for using Skype back in 2007. I said, well, can't we just, stream this? And they said, no, it's a security risk. We're going to shut you down. If you keep doing that, we'll have to deny your access to the internet. It's like, okay. Fast forward today, everyone uses Zoom, and so it just Congress is the opposite of progress, as they say.
Yeah, at times that can be very true. Well, have you thought about any predictions for the upcoming midterm elections? I mean, I'm sure you and your team are communicating with various candidates. At least I hope you are, because you certainly have an amazing depth of knowledge that would be useful. What are you hearing out there?
Well, so the just very clearly the big challenge is turnout, and so we need to make sure that everyone who voted for President Trump in 2024 goes out and votes for our Republican ticket in 2026. That's the ball game of what we're trying to do. So we're looking at different technologies and resources and research to figure out, well, what is going to be effective at motivating those people. Traditionally, as you know, as a student of political history, the president's party loses seats in a midterm, and we really don't have many seats to lose in Washington. And that's why you're seeing this fight in Texas, my home state, for redistricting. And I think a lot of people sort of say, oh, well, it's inevitable that there will be a wave. I think when you dig down, because of the way these districts have been drawn, it's not inevitable. I don't think, Newt Gingrich is probably going to be one of the last speakers to have like a 40, 60 seat swing in control of the chamber. The way we have this redistricting down, it's really limited the handful of competitive seats. So I think it's going to be another squeaker. Historically, you would say, the Democrats are going to pick up seats, but it is so tight, and they certainly haven't found anything to run on or a winning message. I live just across the river from Washington, D.C., and today they're arguing about, we've had 100 homicides in our nation's capital this year already, and it's not that bad. It's a fabricated crime crisis. So they certainly don't have all their ducks in a row to take advantage of it this year either.
One of the things that you've talked about on your show a lot is that, and you mentioned it earlier, that you kind of got into this because the Republicans were really behind the Democrats when it came to adopting technology and utilizing some of these tools. Have you seen, since you've been doing this and since the time you've started kind of working in this space, that the Republicans have closed that gap?
Yeah, in several ways we really have. We've led in shifting our investment to digital media. I talk to my friends who work on the left, and they say, Republicans are much more serious about investing in digital advertising, streaming, things like that. On the other hand, they've been at the forefront of new technologies like relational organizing and making sure that their grassroots is really well organized. Some of that has to do with just differences in the Republican base versus the Democratic base. And we're not out of the woods yet. I mean, it is there are 80,000 elections in a given year, and we need to win all of them. And so not every campaign is up to snuff. So we want to try and pull people across that finish line and get at the cutting edge and really start to develop these best practices or these doctrines for, okay, here's what I do if I do Facebook, or here's how I do an effective video on YouTube. And some of that just takes time and repetition, and we've got to get there and help distribute those findings quicker. I think that's really the challenge is, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet, and we want to make sure that the distribution happens quicker.
Yeah. As candidates incorporate more and more of this kind of technology into not only their campaigns, but into governing, because we're now, we use these tools to communicate with not just our supporters, but to our constituents and the entire electorate. What are there some pitfalls that candidates or elected officials need to be aware of or careful about when they're incorporating too much? And one of the things that I've learned from listening to your podcasts is don't be too reliant that digital technology is going to do all the work for you. That there's still, you still got to get, as my father would like to say, you still got to get some oil under your fingernails. But what are some other pitfalls that folks might need to be careful about when they're evaluating and utilizing these tools?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing we need to remember is what are we doing? Why are we using this? And always remind candidates and campaigners there are 4 things we need to do on a campaign. It's raise money, win votes, get attention, and ruin our opponent's day. It is a zero-sum game, these elections, and So as long as the technology and the tools that we're using are in service to those, it's worth using. This is where we've got to be really careful. So platforms like Facebook and X and Instagram, they're great, but their goals aren't the same as ours. They want to sell more ads to people, and so they want you to spend more time on those platforms. They don't want you to go knock on doors for your candidate. They don't want you to go make phone calls. They want you to stay there and consume ads. And so sometimes we can be at cross purposes. And so I always remind people, the winner isn't the person who got the most views on YouTube or likes on Facebook. It's the person who gets the most votes. And so we've got to stay focused on the fundamentals and using the technology to do that. And I think a lot of people know, the candidates know, that they need to use social media and technology to run their campaign, but they don't know why. And so when you don't know why, that's when you can get kind of wrapped around the axle and get distracted. And so that really is the challenge of our time. I think the other thing is realizing that you are not the star. You are the voice for the people that you represent. And this is not an audition for Fox News. And so there are some people who, kind of flame out really quickly. They're mile wide, inch deep. And it's that is not sufficient to advance your political goals either.
Yeah, great advice. I think, the new shiny object is always thought to be better than the tried and true. And as we utilize and experiment with some of these tools, I think it's wise counsel to remember there's still just what, again, my dad would say, blocking and tackling. There are just certain things that you need to do. And one of those is like knocking on doors and greeting people and meeting people. And as you've alluded to earlier, going to those local events. But again, using the digital space to help broaden your reach, not necessarily replace what you're doing, but just broaden what you're doing. Is that a pretty fair summation?
That's exactly right. And I would leave the image of, if you're building something, you can use that old hand screwdriver, or you could use the power screwdriver. And it's just you're still in charge of what you're building. Your goal remains the same. It's, are you using the technology as leverage to get it done faster? And that really is the proper role of things like AI and social media. It's, how do we get to more people? And that really requires having a strong message and being disciplined on what your goal is.
Eric, this has been a thrill for me. It really has.
Well, I've enjoyed it too,
to be able to talk through some of these things, some of the questions that I've had when I've listened to your various guests on your podcast. I want to thank you for joining me here today on Tennessee Today. And I'm going to encourage you to visit Eric and Campaign Trends. It's particularly if you're a candidate, or an elected official, it is a fantastic place to listen about emerging technologies in the professional political space. So, Eric, best to you and your family. Come see us here in Tennessee when you have a chance.
Thank you, sir. Look forward to getting back to God's country soon.
Yeah, thank you.